recording, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Good, I'll press the... Okay.
Now this is, what show is this one?
Show number 12.
Number 12.
Show number 12. And we're going to be talking about the Noahide laws.
Noahide laws.
First of all, your experience in Melbourne when you were in...
Yes, now, what happened was, the woman I was with at the time, Michelle Nye, she worked for a union, really. It was called AMA, Australian Mines and Minerals Association. And Shell or BP or any large mining group paid about $56,000 a year for membership. And if they had industrial problems, then they would consult these people, AMA, who would put their lawyers to work on it, and having lots of experience dealing with all sorts of industrial disputes, they would fight on the behalf of the large corporation. Now, in the same building, on the same floor, was the Australian Sheep Board. Now, this is one huge conglomeration of representing the export of sheep. Now, Australia is the largest producer of sheep in the world, and it's a very influential part of the Australian society. The fellow who was in charge of it was from South Australia, and he had become the police commissioner at the age of 21 years of age. Now, that's got to ring a bell right there. There's something seriously wrong when someone of the age of 21 can be a police commissioner of the state of South Australia. Anyhow, I would talk to him on a regular basis because I was going there to pick up Michelle, and as I'd be wandering around the office waiting for her to finish, his secretary was a good friend of Michelle's, and her husband was a Freemason. And this particular day, she said, look, there's a meeting of the Noahide laws at one of the big luxury hotels, and would I be interested in going to it? Because her husband was very sick. So they had the tickets. So I said, right, why not? So we go to this meeting, and it is a meeting that is held by a Rabbi Cohen, and his father was the former Governor General of Australia. Now, the Governor General acts on behalf of the Queen, so all laws have to be sanctioned by the Queen, and the Governor General, it's his job to make sure that any laws is passed by Parliament that the Queen would have no objection to. If it's a minor thing, or if it's a major thing, he would get on the phone to the Queen, and she would either say yes or no. So this man was the Governor General. He was also prior to being a Governor General, he was a teacher at one of the big universities, and a man that used to go to his classes was named Barry Jones. Now, Dr. Barry Jones was a very well-known quiz show master. The man was in many competitions with people from around the world, and not only would he answer the question correctly, he'd give the history of everybody associated with the question. For example, if you asked a question about Charles I, not only would he tell you the day he was born and what he did and how he died and blah blah blah, he'd talk about his father, he'd talk about his kids, he'd talk about his cousins, he'd talk about what he wore and what he ate for breakfast. He was that pedantic when it comes to his answers, so he was a very, very clever man. In fact, when he was in Austria, I think it was, he was on a tram going down through one of the cities there, and he suddenly got this urge to get off the tram, and he walked down a little street in the city. I'm not sure, it might have been Vienna. And he went into this little graveyard. He walked up to this grave, and later it was proven that it was the grave of Mozart. So something had been able to get into his bonnet, and he could pick up on the psychic part of the environment that he was in, and felt that he had to get off this tram and walk down the street and go up this alley and into this little graveyard to find Mozart. And that's not a bad recommendation of a man that's got some sort of ability that is feeding him from a spiritual realm. So Barry Jones had been invited to the Noahide laws as to sit on the podium with Supreme Court justices, with Rabbi Cohen and his father, the ex-Governor General, and there was about 8 of them sitting up there. And probably 200 Jews and a couple of Christians were in the audience for the Noahide laws presentation. However, Barry Jones, he didn't show up until halfway through the meeting, after coffee break. And once the Noahide laws started, they began to lay out what it was all about. For the average Jew had no idea what it was. And something has to be amiss when the area that they were in was the wealthiest area in Melbourne, Turak it's called, and the office, which is I went to and walked in because having the name Marshall, I thought I was a Jew, and I was able to walk in, and of course I can speak their language, and they thought I was a Jew. So I found that there's all these security, these gates, people standing around with guns, all this kind of thing to protect the Jews. And so I get in there, right, and walk around and see this asshole that has got a big picture of this guy in the 50s. They thought this man was a Messiah, and I just forgot his name at the moment. What is it?
Rabbi Schneerson.
Schneerson,
yeah.
a pig of a man. However, they thought he was the Messiah. Anyhow, at the Noahide laws, the spiel starts, and they're talking about how the Jews are going to be running the world, and that the Noahide laws will be the laws of the universe, and that any Christian who steps out of line, disobeys one of their laws, a Jew can accuse him without witness and without trial, and that Christian can be beheaded. Well, when I was hearing this, I was a bit stunned, because these people were so genuine in their the way they spoke about it, that they are the chosen, they are this, they are going to rule the world, and this is what they're bringing in, and it's not going to be that long before it all comes to pass. So the laws are supposed to be handed down from Noah to the Jews. So there's a lady, a Jewish lady, sitting in the audience, and after the spiel of what they're going to do and what the penalties are and what the different laws are, and if a Christian or a goy, as they call us, steps out of line just on the say-so of a Jew, they can be beheaded, and blah, 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 and going on. Well, this is quite a horrifying thing to see men who are, in fact, a lot of the men sitting on the podium were Supreme Court justices. And these are the men that you might be standing before in any matter of law during the course of either criminal or civil law in Australia at that time. This is 1997. So I'm listening to this utter rubbish, and this lady in question time, of course they do a bit of a spiel, some of the judges have their say, and then the Zygmunt Cohen, the Governor General, he has his bit of a say. Then his son, Rabbi Cohen, has a bit of a say. And he's primarily, Rabbi Cohen is the one that's doing most of the talking. So, question time. So this lady puts her hand up, and we're all a bit timid by what's going on, because this is quite a frightening thing, to think that these monsters are going to take over, and you step out of line, be a Jew or not. But primarily, even if a Jew blasphemes the name of the Lord or whatever, it's punishable by beheading. Right? No ifs or buts about it. And I'm watching this, and I was quite stunned to think that these educated men were talking that way, and they actually truly believed it. So she says, I have a question, and that is, I can't quite understand how us Jews, the chosen ones, were given these laws by Noah. So the rabbi, he's got an answer, right? And he says, well, sure, that's very, very complex. It's not something we can discuss here at this time because of the complexity of it. You have to know certain things, etc. And you just talk around in circles trying to get out of the question. So next, any other questions? So I stick my hand up, right? So I stood up and I said, yes, thank you, Rabbi Cohen. Perhaps I can answer that question for the lady. I said, what we have is the tribe of Judah, which is of the son, the fifth son, I think it was, of Jacob, who became Israel because his brother had refused a bowl of porridge, which is really stupid, right? So this is what's in the Torah. And as Jacob and his brother Esau, who had a name changed to Edom because he refused what God wanted him to do by selling his birthright for a bowl of porridge. Must have been good porridge, is all I can say. So anyhow, I said, now, when you look at the genetics of it, you've got Noah, and then you've got the three sons of Noah, then you've got the generations down to the time of Jacob and his twin brother Esau. I said, we're looking at about 2,000 years. So the likelihood of Noah walking up to Judah, who was the fifth son of Jacob, Israel, is very unlikely. I said, it just doesn't fit the numbers. So therefore, it's bullshit, right? Well, that went over like a lead balloon, as you might imagine. So then they called for a coffee break, right? They had to regather because I was floored. So I walk out into the area where they're giving coffee, and there's a couple of Jewish judges that come off the podium, and they're talking about, and I sort of just listened in to what they were talking about, how there's a terrible situation and the Christians, they appear before them in court, and you should have the laws in place now to deal with them and going on, right? So there was a group that the lady was with, and as she saw me, she sort of beckoned me, and I walked over and I started talking to her, and a group of Jews soon was gathering to hear what I was saying. And they was asking me when I was going to be doing seminars, because I was the first man that had told them the truth. Right? So in other words, the average Jew is all right. It's the ones that are sitting up there, the psychopaths that sit up there and bark out these laws of the Noahide laws. So one of the Jewish fellows said to me, I don't believe that the Virgin Mary was a virgin. So I said, well, let's get that straight. I said, now, the creator of the universe, who created everything, can't get a woman pregnant. Is that what you're saying? And he sort of looked a bit strange. I said, now, you've got children. He said, yeah. I said, well, when they were conceived, did you know they was going to be conceived? Did you have your eyes closed at the time? And are you sure you're the father? It's not the Jew down the street. Right? So he's a bit stunned about all that. I said, I've had lots of kids and I wasn't trying at all. Right? So I can assure you that the Creator can get a virgin pregnant because it's prophecy, Isaiah. Well, the ladies were quite amused by all this, and the questions flowed on from there. So then it came time to go back in after the coffee break. At this time, the man that's regarded as being the smartest man on earth, Barry Jones, the quiz show genius, he was in a program in Australia when they were children. It was called the Whiz Kids. So all these smart kiddies would be asked these questions. Mind you, I think it was all set up. But anyhow, that's not the point. So Barry Jones, he's now sitting on the podium and he's pissed. So he stands up and he says, he said, I was invited to come here because out of respect out of my professor, who was Zygmunt Cohen, the ex-Governor General of Australia, who was his university teacher, invited me 6 months ago. However, I didn't get a book on the Noahide laws until last night. He said, but I flicked through it. He said, I can speed read, and I am totally disgusted by it. He said, now, first off, I'm a Christian, he said. And this is the most disgusting thing that I've seen. To me, had I had 6 months' notice, I'd have certainly looked into the Noahide laws before going there cold. And as it was, I had no idea what they were at that time. So Barry finishes his spiel and he's yapping on and he's talking about this, he's talking about the Old Testament and he's going on. And my brother was a very smart man, and he had a similar type of way of delivering something. And if he didn't know, he'd ad-lib it and just make it up as he goes along. Well, Barry Jones, because of his notoriety of being one of the smartest men on earth, if he didn't know something, he'd just keep going, because who's going to argue with the smartest man on earth, right? So he was sort of getting into deep water where he didn't quite understand what was going on. So then he sat back down. Rabbi Cohen, any questions from the audience, right? Because no one's going to ask Barry Jones a question. So I stick my hand up. Right? And he's looking around and looking straight past me. He doesn't want me to ask any questions, right? So I stood up anyhow. I said, Dr. Jones, I can recall sitting on my mother's knee, listening to you dissect every vowel of the English language and the wonderful answers you would be able to come up with and give. It's very educational. I said, not that I am any younger than you. It's just that I sat on my mother's knee until a very late age. Well, that brought the house down, right? All the Jews were sort of rolling in the aisles because I'd already had listened to me before out in the area where we was having coffee, and my answers to the lady asking about the Noahide law, so I'd actually destroyed them. But I said, now, I'd like to ask you a question. Now, this is a man that never, in all of the time that he was on the radio and then later on TV, and he would take on these quiz show champions from all around the world, and he just thrashed them. He's an unbelievably smart man. So in his spiel, prior to that, he got into a bit of grey area which he didn't quite understand, but he ad-libbed it that he did. And I said, well, perhaps you could explain for the audience what the tree of life is, Dr. Jones. Right? Well, he sort of looked around a bit and knew he was out of his league. I said, well, I see you're having a bit of a problem. I'll explain it for you. Because I then launched into what the tree of life is, and it's all about Jesus. Now, anyone who announces Jesus as being God in the Noahide law, it's a beheading offence. Because it is blasphemy against their God.
Idolatry.
Idolatry.
You shall not have any idols or false deities. And then, the 7 laws, I'm just reading them here. This is all available on Wikipedia, or Jews that run it anyway. So, 1, the prohibition of idolatry. You shall not have any idols or false deities. Well, that includes Jesus.
Well, you say Jesus in a church hanging on a cross, for example. That's an idol, false idol, right? So go in there and pray before that. That'll get your head cut off, right?
The prohibition of blasphemy. You shall not curse the name of God in Judaism.
So if you were, saying God damn, like they do in America all the time, that's enough to get your head cut off.
Right. The prohibition of murder. You shall not murder.
Right, when they say you shall not murder, the Christians can murder each other, but you can't murder a Jew. That's what that means. Right?
Prohibition of theft. You shall not steal.
Okay, Talmud law again. You can't steal anything that's owned by a Jew, but the Jew can steal anything they like off of you. And in fact, in the Talmud, they are obliged to steal, because everything a non-Jew owns is theirs. Their God says it's theirs.
Prohibition of adultery. You shall not commit adultery.
Okay, that means that a woman, a Jew, cannot have sex with a Gentile, right? But they can have sex with anyone else, that's all right, as long as it's not a Gentile. That's also a beheading offence.
Prohibition of cruelty towards animals. Do not eat flesh taken from an animal while it is still alive. So that's not to eat anything with the blood in it.
What they're saying is that when you are a Jew, you've got to kosher kill something. That means you've got to cut their throat of the animal, and it's got to be bled dry, and then the soul or the life of the animal is now gone. You can then eat its flesh. So you can't just go up and rip its leg off and start eating it, which is probably not what a lot of people would be inclined to do. But that's what that means, that the blood has to be, the throat has to be cut, and the blood is bled out. It pours into the ground, I believe, and could be into a bowl. I'm not sure about that. Either way, it's a kosher killing. Anything else?
Number 7, the requirement to have just laws. Set up a governing body of justice, example, the courts.
Okay, the court will be entirely run by the Jews. They will be Talmudic Jews, and what they say goes. And there's no reprisal if they were to turn around and take an innocent man or woman and have them beheaded. Say, oh, well, a bit of a mistake, doesn't matter. Because you're an animal with hands to put on the earth to serve them. That's what the Talmud states. Now, the Talmud is a tremendous, huge volume of work. And if you're a rabbi, you consult the Talmud, but it's not something that's available to the average Jew. They wouldn't know. The average Jew would be quite horrified by what I'm telling you. And I can assure you, if the average Jew knew what these rabbis do and why they have been kicked out of 80 countries over the years for killing children, because a child is a white child, rather I should say a Christian child. When I say white, I meant by the fact that it's blonde and blue-eyed. They are the ideal child to sacrifice, and what they do is they might take a small child, 8 or 9 years old, and nail a poor baby to a cross, and the child is absolutely tortured and terrified, and then they'll cut the child's throat, kosher killing, or they'll slit open the groin area for the large artery and then collect the blood, and the child will slowly bleed to death. The child is then taken to an abattoir which they own, and they can't touch the body. And then it's put into the abattoir, ground up, and then sold as hamburgers, usually out through McDonald's or something like that. The sadistic plan there is that there's 100,000 children go missing each year in America. And the FBI actually exposed several corporations that steal children and then put them in cages and then ship them off to all parts of America for child sacrifice. Now, out of the blood, not only do they drink it, they make what's called a matzo ball. It's like a little round ball that when they eat it, they are taking on the endorphins of the child that's killed in fear. And also, it's a Christian baby, so therefore it has the soul of God, Jesus, in it. And by doing that, they are able to take the life force. That they know the life force comes through Jesus. Jesus is God Almighty. So they are taking the life force. Now, I'll give an example of that. When we were in Egypt, there was a man there that was reportedly one of the wealthiest men in Egypt, and he owned all these drugstores or pharmaceutical outlets throughout Europe. And he owned this big hotel, but he had a blood disorder. And I was sitting beside his wife and I was talking to her, and he was across the table from me, and sort of, it was a bit noisy, and it was on the street really, and it was a bit noisy. And so I got to talking to her, but she was a nice enough lady, definitely Jews. And as I say, with my name being Marshall, they think I'm a Jew too. So they're a bit more forthcoming with the information than you would with a guy that comes in who's not named Marshall. So it turns out that I was told by others, and I was trying to get out of this lady whether it was true or not, and apparently it is that he goes to Germany once a month, and he has to have a transfusion of all his blood taken out and new blood put in, and it's a children's blood. So he goes there for the specific purpose of exchanging his blood for children's blood. Now, it is very unlikely that if you go to the Red Cross, that there'll be too many children sitting there donating a pint of blood. Matter of fact, I think it would be extremely rare. So the question is, here's this great big fat turd that would probably need 8 pints of blood, and he has to take his carcass to Germany where they have children's blood available for this arsehole.
Every month.
Every month. So how many babies have to be taken off the street and their blood drained from their bodies unwillingly? They're not doing it because they like it, they're doing it because they're sacrificed. And how many children would be killed for that one man to stay alive if he requires 8 pints of blood? Well, you probably find there's 5 or 6 children that would be sacrificed to get the blood for that one man. That's just one of the abominations they do. But as far as they're concerned, it's like slaughtering a pig. You're an animal with hands. This is the Talmud. You're an animal with hands placed on the earth to serve the Jew. Now, you Jews that are listening to this is what gets you into trouble. So, I'd advise you very strongly that you're looking at the man who is the one that's here, that is the Messiah. I'm also the Jewish Messiah. This is what Yitzhak Rabin was talking about. Kaduri, I'm sorry. Yitzhak Kaduri. He said that he had spoke to Jesus, which would be the angel of Jesus, every day for a year. And that there's other rabbis that agreed with him. And he said that the rabbis that agreed with him also were of the opinion that their Messiah would not be coming to Israel, would not be coming to Jerusalem, that he would be communicating with them via the internet. That's what Yitzhak Kaduri and the other rabbis of like minds, which is very few amongst them, they were all horrified to find out what he said, that the Messiah was Jesus, right? But this is what he said. Now, you can say, well, why not Messiah go to Jerusalem? Why? Well, Fukushima is giving off this radiation, and it's all flowing northward, and it's already in Europe and the waterways of the Pacific, and it's mingling over the top of the Arctic Circle, going down into the North Sea. And the North Sea and the Atlantic become one, and then the water is flowing in one direction. This is what happens in the Straits of Gibraltar. It's 14 kilometres wide, and the water flows in at the same rate as what it evaporates from the Mediterranean, which is a very large area of water. For example, if you was to sail from Cornwall in England to the shores of Israel, you've covered about 4,000 miles. It's a very, very long journey. So it's much larger than you'd expect. So the evaporation of water from the Mediterranean is supplied by the water that's coming in from the Atlantic, which is now radiated. When you get over near towards the Middle East, say this so-called alleged Holy Lands, I call it the hate lands, the depth of the water is over 4,500 metres deep, so it's around 16,000 feet deep. So what happens is the water that's heavier because of the salt content, it will flow back out under the water coming in from the Atlantic through the Straits of Gibraltar at a very slow rate, and it balances depending on the time of year. So if you're in midsummer, the water that's being evaporated from the Mediterranean is vast, and the flow out of the salt water that's heavier than the water coming in from the surface is very, very slow indeed. And the water that's coming in at the top is coming in at quite a fast rate of knots. Now, what Europeans aren't aware of is that the amount of water that's flowing in is enough power to supply all of Europe with electricity. You don't have to have nuclear power plants. In fact, you don't have to have the nuclear power plants anyhow, because, as Albert Einstein said, it's one hell of a way to heat water. So there's a thing that has been kept quiet. It's called thorium, isn't it?
Thorium, yes.
Thorium is in such vast quantities, it costs around $50 a pound, and it's available on most beaches in the world. You just go and scoop it up, and there's you process it and you get thorium. 3 containers full of thorium would supply all the electricity for the United States for about 30 cents per year per person, for all the electricity you want. 30 cents per person per year. Why would you use nuclear? Well, the problem with nuclear is it is a way of killing everybody. Because the Jews know I'm here. They've known since I was born. It's in the stars, it's in astrology, it's in the royal line. I mean, it's not hard to find. You've got to find the most royal person. You wouldn't expect God to come back to the earth without being the most and true royal person. Well, it certainly isn't the Queen or any of her Jewish brethren. They are all Noahide Jews. The Queen signs death warrants all day long for the countries that is under her dominion. So the reality is that it's easy to find who the Messiah is, because all you've got to do is go to Burke's Peerage and sniff it out, and you'll find that it's the Golightly and the Marshall family. Right. The most royal is the Golightly line. Then it goes down to the marriage of my grandmother, Mary Harrison. And Harrison came over to England around 847, and they are the Habsburgs. And to avoid the carnage that was going on in Europe with kings like Charlemagne were beheading people, they decided they'd had enough of this, so they went to England and changed their name to Harrison. It was Harrisson, and that was around 847. So she's a direct line of the Habsburgs, so the original Habsburgs, which weren't the corrupt Habsburgs who come down to the time of Hitler. Right, there's a different group of people altogether. They just pick up the name and use it, right? So Hitler was a saint, by the way. All you Jews out there who think you were suffering through the Holocaust, and you've got, my grandfather went through the Holocaust, my grandfather, my grandmother, they've even got tattoos on them. Wait a minute. If we got the Holocaust story right, you walked off the train, you're straight into the gas chamber and burned, right? Now, if you'd been in there for 4 years, how come? They probably would have found you hiding in a cupboard somewhere if you was in there for 4 years. The reality is that it didn't happen. The word Holocaust didn't start becoming a word that was recognised as meaning fire, sacrifice by fire, until the late 60s. And that's when they started to get the reparation.
All about money.
Scam going.
Money.
So Germany has paid out a fortune for this racket. Now, they got away with it and they're still doing it, but the problem is these little children that grow up in Germany and they grow up with an idea that Hitler was a monster, and they did do these things to the Jews, and in fact it didn't happen. The Jews at the time were Churchill and Roosevelt.
And Stalin.
No, Stalin was a Catholic.
Was it? Oh, and then what, became an atheist? Or?
Stalin became an atheist after reading the best book he's ever read was Charles Darwin's Natural Selection of Species, or something like that called. And he was responsible for killing 60, I get the number here. You heard about 6 million Jews, it was entirely made up. He was responsible for killing minimum of 60 million Christians in Russia. He brought out laws that they weren't allowed to hoard food, and they weren't allowed to have machines for farming, and it got to the point where there is actual films on the internet, on YouTube in particular, that shows how the soldiers were going in and exposing where food had been hidden by families, and it was taken away and their machines were ruined. So what happens? The first winter comes along and they all starve to death and die of cold. And there's even instances where people were so desperate that they would pick up a dead body and eat it. Cannibalism was happening.
Just clarifying, the tribulation that in Matthew...
Well, that's happened.
That's World War II, isn't it?
Of course it is.
Yes. Because you say in Matthew that, you know, the tribulation of those days, which is World War II, which was approximately 7 years, the carnage that went on.
World War II is not over. World War I is not over. World War II was just another revival of the same story. The problem was, and always has been, the power behind Judaism and the Talmud. That's where it all comes from. So you've got the Zionists, and you've got the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. Now, write this down. Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, protocol number 14. There's 24 protocols in all. Protocol 14, like the other 23, are quite long, and as in the Jewish tradition, they rave on and use big words to confuse, but primarily what it's saying is that they will forbid Christ. Now, only the Jews know Christ is coming back as a man. The Christian world is totally devoured by Saul, which in the concordance is only one word away from Satan. And I ask you, if the word Jesus was one word away from the devil, that'd be all over the world's news, right? But Saul, which is one word away from Satan, is what dominates all churches in the world. It's always, Paul said this and Paul said that, and blah, 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 blah. Now, Saul was a Pharisee. The Pharisees come from Babylon. The Babylonians is where the Talmud originated. And this is where it's okay to have sex with a child, provided the child is 3 years and 1 day old. Doesn't matter if it's male or female, that's okay. This is what a rabbi can do.
Just on that note, looking at this Wikipedia about the Noahide laws, first of all, there's the High Council of B'nai Noah. B'nai Noah meaning the children of Noah. A High Council of B'nai Noah was endorsed on January the 10th, 2006 by a group established in Israel in 2004 that claims to be the new Sanhedrin. This council was set up to represent B'nai Noah communities around the world, and it was Schneerson in the 80s. He's the one that forged ahead with all the Noahide, pushing ahead with the campaign of the Noahide laws. But in the bibliography, in the references of this wiki site, number 6, Jesus the Pharisee, a new look at the Jewishness of Jesus by Rabbi Harvey Falk. So now they're making you out to be a Pharisee.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to show you that Jesus was an Essene. It's the oldest religion. Religion is not a good word. It's the oldest truth. Everything else is a religion. It's the oldest truth, and it was brought to the earth by Enoch. The Great Pyramid was built by the descendants of Enoch, and the base of the pyramid is 365.24 inches round, and Enoch was taken up when he was 365 years. So it would have been 365.2424. His son was Methuselah. These people were very big and they lived very long lives. This is before the flood. So they were the ones, with Lamech, who lived 777 years, and all of the relations of the time, built the Great Pyramid. And it's the altar to the Lord in the midst of Egypt. Isaiah 19:19 and Isaiah 19:20. Those two verses have a Hebrew letters that are also numbers, and it's called gematria. And the gematria of those two numbers are equal to the height of the pyramid up to the rejected or missing capstone. So in feet, it's 454.57 feet. Now, if you was to level off all the mountains and fill in the valleys, the land mass itself is the same height as the pyramid up to the missing capstone. How are we going for time?
You've got 15 minutes.
All right. Now, what you have is the base of the pyramid has got a code in it. If you look at the structure and you know anything about it, the base is 365.24.24, and these were laid out on 4 corner sockets with fine chisel lines in it, so that when you know and join up the chisel lines, you get your 365.24.24 pyramid inches. The pyramid inch is based on dividing the polar diameter of the Earth by 500 million. That's where you get the pyramid inch from. There's more to it than that, which I won't go into at this moment, but just keep that in mind. You're dividing the Earth. It's actually, I'll say it now. Before the flood occurred, the Earth was 25,000 miles around. So you divide that by pi, you get your radius, and 2 times the radius is your diameter. Divide that by 500 million, and you've got yourself the pyramid inch. The pyramid inch is slightly larger than the British inch. The British inch used to be the same size as the pyramid inch, but in the reign of Elizabeth, they decided to change it. So 1 British inch is 1.00106 inches to make 1 pyramid inch. So it's a slight, minus little half a hair thick is the difference between the two. So what you do is you look at the Great Pyramid and you find that it's been shrunk. So why? So you take off what is called the displacement factor. And that's 286.1 pyramid inches. That gives you a base of 36238.14 pyramid inches. So the number 3623 is espousal in Hebrew of the James Strong's Hebrew Concordance of the Old Testament. And just to clarify, the concordance also includes the Aramaic, because although most people assume the Bible is written in Hebrew in the Old Testament, it's also Aramaic and Chaldean. So it's actually 3 languages involved, but they're very close. So it might say espousal from a word of Aramaic meaning wife or wives, plural. Then you've got the number 286.1, which is the shrinkage factor of this structure. And inside the building itself, the descending passage and ascending passage is built 286.1 pyramid inches off centre. And when you go into the grand gallery inside, it is 286.1 pyramid inches high. When you get to the top of the grand gallery, which is about 157 feet long, it's actually 1880 approximately inches long. I'll just give it to that feet. Well, I said 157. It's 156.666 feet, but it's also pyramid inches, so you'd have to multiply that by 1.00106, and that gives you just under 157 feet. Now, from there you go in through the past, on the 50th layer of masonry, you go past from this great step. You go into the antechamber, which is 116.26 pyramid inches wide, and there's 3 leaves in that. 2 have been smashed, 1 is in place, but it's obvious there was 2 others in there at one stage. You go to the far wall, and then it is approximately 537.02 blah 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 inches, and then you move to the coffer, which is 286.1 inches. You add those 2 together. Then you go to the ceiling, which is approximately 230.25 decimal places, and that gives you a number. Then you multiply by a lunation, and the lunation has to be precise. If you ask most people, say, how long is the lunation of the moon? They say 29.53 days. It's not. It's 29.53052 days. The reason for that is when you multiply the 3 numbers added together by that number, it gives you 31101, which is the Julian day I was born on. So if you don't include the right numbers, you're not going to get my birthday, are you? So we're just reading now where these Noahide laws have been ratified, blah, blah, blah. And when was it? January the 10th.
This is
which
when
is January
the High
the 11th.
Council, yeah. When
January
the High
11th
Council, Benai Noah, was formed.
Right.
A High Council of Benai Noah was endorsed on January the 10th, so it would have been 11th here.
So this is the Sanhedrin, is it?
Yes, it was established in Israel to be the new Sanhedrin.
Well, the old Sanhedrin comes from Babylon. So the Pharisees and all the churches, if you ask any minister, what are you? They say, I'm a Pharisee. Well, they're teaching the Pharisee doctrine, which is Judaism, the Noahide laws. There's 5 books of the Old Testament, which they say is the word of God, which is a word of the devil. Because in it, Moses was talking to God on a daily basis. He had a team of stenographers running around the desert. He was so stupid he couldn't find his way across the Jordan into Jerusalem, right? And when he does get over there, the Lord says to him, I'm sorry, Noah, you're not going into the promised land because you hit a rock twice, see? I told you to hit it once. You hit it twice. So you climb up Mount Nebo and that's where you're going to die, son. So he climbs up the mountain, that's where he croaks it, right? However, to get to Mount Nebo, you have to go through the promised land to get there. So they're so stupid, they was already in the promised land, walked across, crossed the Jordan, up bloody Mount Nebo, looking down on the promised land, which they're not allowed to go into. They just walk through it. This is how stupid the scholars are. However, there are many, and I should make a talk on this alone, on how many laws there are where people are stoned to death for doing the most silly little things. Now, Noah couldn't even go in, or rather, Moses couldn't go into the promised land for hitting a stone twice with his stick. So, he disobeyed God. He disobeyed Lucifer. And he was told to stone a man to death for picking up sticks on the Sabbath. If you look in your Bible, the King James Bible in particular, and I haven't checked on the other Bibles, but the King James Bible, if you look in there and punch in the word Sabbath, it should have a capital S, but it hasn't. It's got a small s. Why have they done that? Because Jesus said, I am the Sabbath. So it's a slap in the face of Jesus all the time. The word Sabbath is found in 115 times in the Bible, and the name Golightly has a value in English geometry over 115. So I am the Sabbath. You can spell it with a slow s if you like. It doesn't make any damn difference to me. Right? It's all bullshit. It's the codes we're talking about. So we go back to the displacement factor, and we end up with the word espousal. So you want to find the word 286 being espousal. So you look in your Bible, you look in your concordance, you can't find it. Why? Well, they've stuck an S on the end of it, so it's espousals with an S. So where you find it is very interesting. And we'll just do it now. This is in Solomon 3:11. Go forth, O ye daughters of Zion, and behold, King Solomon with the crown wherein his mother, who was the adulteress Bathsheba, and he had murdered his brother to get the job because Bathsheba had gone to David when he was sleeping with this young woman to keep him warm just before he died. They used to do that. They'd put a young maiden, young virgin, in bed with the old man to keep him alive, right? For the warmth of the body. And his brother, Adonijah, which means worshipper of Jah, had been ready to become king because he was the older brother, but Bathsheba had gone in to see David as he's dying and said that if Adonijah becomes king, he will kill us for our sins of the past. Well, she was an adulteress, that's it. That was punishable by stoning, and a murderer, because the man that she was married to was sent to the front line. Instead of David going out into battle, he sent his this young man out and told his commanders, his chief, to put him in the front line so he'd be killed. So this young lady who was sleeping in the same bed to keep old David warm before he died, she heard Bathsheba plotting to do away with Adonijah. So David relents because he's dying, he's sick, he's tired, and the word goes out that Solomon is going to be king. The very first thing that Solomon does, after he gets word from his mother Bathsheba that Adonijah was quite content, saying, okay, that's what the father wanted, I'll go along with that. All he wanted was a wife. And the woman he wanted to be his wife was a young virgin that was in the bed keeping old David warm. So Bathsheba took the news to Solomon, who now is king, and says, well, all your brother wants is a wife, and he wants the young girl, the young virgin that was keeping your father warm. So Solomon, he loses his cool, and he abuses his mother. Don't you realise what this means? Well, what it was, it doesn't actually say, but what it was, that she was a witness to what had happened. So he then orders his henchmen to go and kill his brother. And that's the first thing he does as king. This is Solomon. All right, so we read, Go forth, ye daughters of Zion, and behold, King Solomon with the crown wherein his mother Bathsheba crowned him. So his mother got to crown him in the day of his espousal and in the day of the gladness of his heart. So we go to the word espousal, we're going to look it up. And it's espousal with an S on it. So you can't find it if you're looking for it. And it is a number 2861. So we then have a second espousal, and we've got to look at that. Remember, it's got to have an S on the end of it. So there's two of them, of course. That's the Solomon 3:11 and Jeremiah 2:2. Go and cry in the ears of Jerusalem, saying, Thus saith the Lord, I remember thee, the kindness of thy youth, the love of thine espousals, when thou went after me in the wilderness, in a land that was not sown. Now, the point of this is, you've got Jeremiah 2:2, so you put it in as a math, right? 2.2. So you'd write it 2.02. Then you add Solomon 3.11, and you got 5.13. What is 5.13? 5.13 is the verse that slam dunks everything, because number one, you've got two espousals here. One is the displacement factor of the pyramid, 286.1, and the other one is a number of 36524.24, which is the age that Enoch ascended, where he was taken up and didn't die. And you subtract the 286.1, you shrink the base of the pyramid in by the 286.1, so when it goes up to the average height of the land mass, which is 454.57 feet, then that number is too small on its base to accommodate a capstone that is to fit a pyramid that is in its fullness with a base of 36524.24. So the summit platform can't go any higher than the average land mass of the earth, and therefore it is 286.1 in its perimeter, too small for the missing capstone that we see today. So what that means is that the capstone has to be placed somewhere. So where is it? Well, it's what you do is you take the diagonal of the completed pyramid, which is 10772.6 feet, and that is the age difference between the beheading of Charles I, who died to be with Jesus, and myself, my birth, which is 107726 days, and then I inherited a house from my parents, and it's at 7 Travone Street, Padstow in Sydney, and in Cornwall, where the family of Jesus' mother, grandmother and grandfather came from, was Cornwall. That's why Joseph of Arimathea was a tin man, and is a tin man in Cornwall to this day, and the tin mines have been operating since 2500 BC. And he was the richest man, and he was the one that begged the body from Pontius Pilate, who was a friend. We're running out of time, aren't we?
Yes, you are. You've done really well.
Sorry about that. So what we have then is 1 Chronicles 5:13, which has in it 7 names, which totals 31106, divided by 7 gives you 4443, which is how many times the word God is found in the Old and New Testament combined, which is 3877 times, and that is the distance from the South Pole to the hospital I was born in, making me the Lord. Okay? It ain't that difficult.
So good night.
Good night. Good night, Dick.
We sing a song when we're in the ghetto.
Everybody in the ghetto?
No. Oh, no, everybody loves somebody. Go. Dino.
Everybody loves somebody sometimes. Everybody falls in love somehow. Something in your kiss keeps saying this sometimes is not.
That's it. We're out of here.
What?
It's gone.
Oh dear. We'll play that last bit because that's the best bit.
Well, you still got that one going.